So, welcome to all participants of this webinar. This is first in a series of 3 aimed to equip project owners with tips and advice as how to apply the EU Innovation Fund. The webinar is sponsored by Energistyrelsen, the Danish Energy Agency, and performed in partnership with Nordic Innovators. My name is Claus Andersen. I am National Contact Point for the Innovation Fund, and as such, I'm the Danish public interface with the fund. I'm also head of Team EU Funding at Energistyrelsen. Team EU Funding was established 2 years ago and with a mission to support Danish companies in applying the Innovation Fund. It is indeed an exciting time point right now. We await the results from last year's call, 24, and expect it to be published by beginning of next week. At the same time, we are looking forward to prepare for the next call, the 25, to be published by 3rd of December. As we can see on the next slide, the Energistyrelsen Team EU Funding offers a range of services in support of applying the Innovation Fund. Firstly, we host a National Info Day in Copenhagen, where senior experts provide information on the open call, and in addition, we offer one-to-one consultations with a closed door to ask critical questions to senior. This will most likely be the 3rd week of January 2026. Secondly, as I already mentioned, we sponsor a series of webinars in partnership this year with Nordic Innovators. Thirdly, we sponsor validation assessments of project ideas to be measured against the Innovation Fund selection criteria, up to 25 hours of consultancy by experts and paid by Energistyrelsen. Lastly, we host a support program with the offer of covering up to 50% with a max of 500,000 Danish kroner of the cost to develop a competitive application for the Innovation Fund. For more information on this, please contact me or consult our webpage on ENS.dk. And with this, I wish you all a fruitful webinar, and I give the word to Nordic Innovators.
Thank you very much, Klaus, and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you very much also from our side for joining today's session. First of all, on behalf of Nordic Innovators, I would like to thank the Danish Energy Agency for the opportunity to host this webinar and for their continued efforts to strengthen Denmark's participation in major European funding programs such as the EU Innovation Fund. It's indeed a real pleasure to have you today in this session and to see such strong interest from Danish companies and project promoters. We know that many of you are already driving some of Europe's most ambitious clean tech and decarbonization projects, and the Innovation Fund is precisely the instrument designed to take these ideas from concept to large-scale implementation. Before we start, a quick word about who we are. My name is Felix. I co-lead the Energy and Climate Business Unit at Nordic Innovators, together with my colleague Filippo, and we are joined today by our colleague and senior consultant Inigo. Nordic Innovators, our role is to help ambitious companies secure public funding for breakthrough projects. Over the past years, our team has, for instance, built one of the most experienced Innovation Fund advisory portfolios in Europe, with more than a dozen successful applications and over 800 million euro in grants secured for our clients in this program. Today, we combine technical and industrial know-how with financial and business expertise, and this complementarity allows us to translate complex technical ideas into proposals to align with SENEA's evaluation standards. But enough about us. Today is really about you and how your project can benefit from this Innovation Fund opportunity. Before we dive into the main content, let me briefly outline what we will cover in today's session and how this fits into the overall webinar series. The objective of this first session is to help you familiarize yourself with the Innovation Fund, how it works, what kind of project it supports, and the practical aspects of participating. We'll also look at why the Innovation Fund is particularly relevant for Danish industry and energy stakeholders, given Denmark's strong position in green and climate tech technologies overall. So by the end of this session, you hopefully should have a clear understanding of the fund's objectives, structure, and different calls, be able to identify whether your project organization is eligible, and understand the funding logic and next steps to prepare a competitive proposal. Finally, as introduced also by Klaus, this webinar is part of a 3-part series. In November, we'll go deeper into the evaluation and selection criteria, and in January, then we'll share practical tips and tricks from our previous successful collaborations on how to prepare a winning innovation fund proposal. Let me then briefly walk you through today's agenda. We'll start with an overview on the innovation fund, explaining how the program works and what types of projects it supports. Next, we'll then look at the selection criteria used by CNEA, essentially what evaluators are looking for in a strong proposal. And then also move on how to calculate the grant of your projects, which is one of the most practical aspects for applicants, of course. We then guide you through the application process and the main steps for proposal preparation. After a short break, a particularly exciting part of today's session then will come in section 5, where we'll hear directly from a real innovation fund beneficiary. Kevin will share his and his team's experience in applying and managing an innovation fund project, what worked well, what challenges they faced, and what lessons they can pass on to future applicants. Finally, then we will up with some key takeaways, explore alternative EU funding opportunities, and close with a Q&A and discussion. To understand how the Innovation Fund operates, it's important to look briefly at its policy and regulatory background. The fund was created under the EU Emission Trading System Directive, specifically the Article 10A, as one of the European Union's flagship instruments to decarbonize energy-intensive industries and the energy sector. In simple terms, this means that part of the revenues generated from auctioning of CO2 emission allowances under the ETS are reinvested directly into innovation. So in a way, polluters' payments are used to finance Europe's clean transition. The Innovation Fund is the successor to the earlier NER 300 program, which some of you might remember. While this program had a budget of around 2 billion euro and supported mainly renewable energy demonstration projects, the Innovation Fund is on a completely different scale. It's now worth over 40 billion euro for the 2020 to 2030 period, depending, of course, on the carbon price. And it covers also a much wider range of technologies, from renewable production, hydrogen, CCUS, to low carbon fuels, energy storage, and now also manufacturing of net zero technologies. The fund plays a central role in achieving the EU's climate goals, as shown in the policy pyramid on the right. At the top, we have the European Green Deal, which commits the EU to climate neutrality by 2050. Beneath that, the fund supports the key policy packages that translate this vision into practice. We have the Fit for 55 package, which sets the 2030 emission reduction targets of at least 55%. Repower EU, focusing on accelerating the deployment of renewables and reducing dependency on imported fossil fuels. And the Net Zero Industry Act, which aims to strengthen EU's industrial capacity, mainly to manufacture clean energy technologies. All of these initiatives rely on the Innovation Fund as their main financial instrument to bring technologies from demonstration to commercial scale. The fund, as mentioned, is organized by CNEA, the European Climate Infrastructure and Environment Executive Agency, on behalf of DG Climate at the European Commission. CNEA is hereby responsible for running the calls, evaluating applications, and monitoring the implementation once projects are selected. In terms of focus, the Innovation Fund supports first-of-its-kind technologies and projects, which means that they target projects that go beyond the state-of-the-art, that can deliver significant and verifiable greenhouse gas reductions compared to a conventional fossil fuel-driven process. As we will see in much more detail in the following, it is thus not about incremental improvement, it's about scaling technologies that can truly transform entire sectors. The Innovation Fund pursues 4 main objectives. First, it seeks to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in Europe's most energy-intensive industries, where decarbonization typically is technically complex and costly. These are the areas that also account for a large share of Europe's industrial emissions, so supporting innovation here has the biggest impact. Second, it exists to support innovation in low carbon technologies, not incremental improvement as mentioned, but breakthrough solutions that can fundamentally change these industries or change how these industries operate. Third, the fund aims to enable market replication and cost reduction through scale up. It's about moving from one-off pilot plants to first commercial scale facilities that demonstrate that certain technologies work at industrial level, can attract investors, and compete on cost with conventional alternatives. And finally, the fund works to leverage private investment. Each euro of innovation fund support is designed to crowd in several euros of private capital, because real decarbonization only happens when the market sees a viable business case. In practice, the innovation fund sees itself therefore as a picky investor. It doesn't finance any early research or exploratory concept. It invests selectively in projects that are nearly ready for the market, but still face a first of its kind risk barrier that private finance alone won't cover. Therefore, projects must be mature, technically credible, and backed by committed partners and investors. This brings us to the lower diagram of this slide, where you can see how the fund bridges the gap between innovation and market deployment. On the technology readiness scale, this corresponds to roughly a TRL of 6 to 8. So technologies that have already been proven at lab or pilot scale and are now moving towards pre or full commercial demonstration or first market rollouts. At the one end of the roadmap, we have R&D and early innovation, typically covered by other EU programs like the Horizon Europe. At the other end, we have full market deployment where technologies are commercially available and bankable. The Innovation Fund then sits right in the middle, supporting projects that turn prototypes into operating industrial facilities. Essentially, the Innovation Fund offers several funding windows or call types, each designed for projects at different stages of technological and financial maturity. These range from early demonstrations to full industrial deployments. Let's maybe start from the top of the table, where the first indicated call type is the pilot call. Pilot projects typically involve less than 40 million total grants and are meant for early stage demonstration or pre-commercial system and production processes, usually around TL 6 to 7 on the technology readiness scale. You can think, for instance, of pilots as the bridge between a lab scale prototype and a first industrial demonstration. They test whether an innovation process or technology actually works under operation conditions. Here, innovation is absolutely crucial because pilot projects are evaluated much more critically on their level of breakthroughness and novelty. The evaluators expect these pilot projects to clearly go beyond the current state of the art, not just improving existing processes, but showcasing something truly new and transformative. The next level is the small scale call, covering CapEx investments between 2.5 and 20 million euro. This often is the entry point for smaller companies and SMEs developing innovative decarbonization projects such as lower sized commercial plants or modular technologies. The aim is to give smaller actors a chance to validate their innovations and prepare for larger scale deployment subsequently. Then we have the medium scale call, which supports projects between 20 million and 100 million euro in CapEx. These are usually first of its kind industrial facilities or medium-sized deployments of new technologies at commercial scale. At this level, we typically see collaborations between SMEs and large industrial players, combining technological innovation with strong implementation capacity. At the end, then, there's the large-scale call, designed for projects with CapEx above 100 million euro. This is where we see the industrial deployment of breakthrough technologies. The first commercial plants that can achieve large-scale emission reductions. And these projects often come from energy-intensive industries such as cement, steel, hydrogen, or chemicals, and sometimes integrate renewable energy or CO2 capture into existing facilities. But this also tells us that these projects are large and complex undertakings with multi-year timelines and strong consortium structures. Finally, also a quick word on the auctions organized by CINEA, in which Nordic Innovators also extensively works in. The auctions, for example, the hydrogen auction and now the newly launched heat auction, are different types of innovation fund mechanisms. Instead of applying through a traditional proposal, auction projects bid for support based on the lowest price of hydrogen or the amount of subsidy per ton of CO2 avoided. These are highly specific and indeed technology-targeted competitions aimed at accelerating market deployment for priority sectors like hydrogen or renewables. That said, these auctions are not focus of today's sessions, as our goal is to help you understand and prepare for the main innovation fund calls. Let's therefore take a moment to look at the overall budget and financial structure behind the program. The Innovation Fund is one of the largest funding instruments in the world for industrial decarbonization. Over the period 20 to 30, as already mentioned, it is expected to mobilize around 40 billion euro in total, although the exact amount, of course, depends on the revenues from the ETS system. The average carbon price is currently assumed at about 65 euro per ton of CO2, but this, of course, can fluctuate year to year, meaning that the fund's size and distribution also shifts slightly within the carbon market for each upcoming call. Looking at how the money is allocated among different calls, the largest there, as you can imagine, typically about 45% goes to the large-scale projects, which of course focus on major industrial deployment. Pilots, medium-scale and manufacturing projects each account for roughly 50% of the total budget, while small-scale projects usually receive around 10% of the total budget. These figures are of course indicative, but show a clear policy direction. Most of the funding is channeled towards large transformative industrial projects, while still maintaining space for early demonstrations and manufacturing capacity. A key point to underline is that Innovation Fund provides non-repayable grants. This is not a loan or a blended instrument. So the funding is typically dispersed over more than 10 years period, and each tranche of the grant payment is linked to a project-specific milestone, such as reaching financial close or final investment decision, a final commissioning, and verified greenhouse gas emission reductions. So the fund really pays for results, meaning that the projects need to demonstrate that they are delivering measurable climate impact. Now that we have covered the structure and budget of the Innovation Fund, let's talk about who can actually apply. One of the strengths of the Innovation Fund is that it's open to a wide range of applicants, as long as they meet a few basic legal and project-related conditions. Let's probably start with the legal eligibility. Any entity established in a new member state, Norway or Iceland, can apply. So this includes Denmark and all other EEA countries. Both public and private organizations are eligible, from large industrial companies to smaller technology developers, municipalities, or even public utilities. Importantly, applications can be made either individually or as part of a consortium. In practice, this flexibility allows different types of organizations to team up, for example, a technology provider working together with an industrial off-taker, or a municipality joining as the site host for projects, for instance. Then we have the project eligibility criteria, which are absolutely essential. First, the project must be implemented within EU or EEA territory. This means that all the activities financed by the Innovation Fund, from construction to operation, need to take place within this geographic scope. Second, the project must demonstrate a significant greenhouse gas reduction potential. We will learn about this selection criteria in much more detail in the following. The fund only supports projects that can deliver a measurable climate impact compared to conventional technology. So quantifying those emission reductions early on is critical. And third, the projects must be based on innovative technologies, as mentioned, that goes beyond the state of the art. Incremental improvements are not enough. The Innovation Fund really looks for first of its kind solution, meaning technologies or processes that even have not yet been commercially deployed in Europe at this scale. In terms of typical applicants, most successful Innovation Fund projects come from industrial companies, technology developers, utilities, and energy producers. You also see ports and municipalities participating, often as mentioned as site hosts or partners providing local infrastructure and permits. At Nordic Innovators, we've worked with both individual applicants and multi-partner consortia, helping them to structure the Innovation Fund proposals to align with these eligibility and strategic requirements. Our experience shows that both approaches can be successful, but each require a slightly different strategy. For instance, for individual applicants, the challenge is often to demonstrate that they have the full technical and financial capacity to deliver a large-scale project on their own. For consortia, the focus shifts then to defining clear roles, responsibilities, and interdependencies between partners, ensuring that the project is coherent and that evaluators see a strong, united team. Now that we have covered who can apply, let's look at a question that almost every potential applicant asks early on. What exactly can be funded under this program? Now, the short answer is that that Innovation Fund supports innovative technologies, processes, and systems that can deliver measurable reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. But there are a few very specific rules around what types of costs are eligible and how the fund is actually paid out. Let's start with the eligible costs shown here on the left. The Innovation Fund mainly covers CapEx, and that is directly linked to the innovative part of the project. For instance, the equipment, installations, or systems that make the technology really first of its kind. It can also cover part of the OpEx associated with running the innovative installations for a maximum of 10 years. These costs must directly be linked to the implementation operation of the innovative technology process and contribute to achieving the project's greenhouse gas emission objectives. Not put on the slide, but important to note is also that DevEx can be funded, so the development expenditures, including engineering, design, permitting, and preparatory studies. This is essentially all the work needed to move your project from concept to a fully investable and mature ready stage. Now turning to the non-eligible costs, and this is important. The fund will namely not support routine equipment replacement or upgrades that would happen anyway. Standard commercial installations that don't include an innovative element can also not be supported, and any activity that take place outside the EU or EA area. And this aligns also with the fund's objectives to focus public money where it really drives innovation and emission reductions rather than funding business as usual investments. Moving to the funding intensity, which is how much support the fund can provide. The fund in theory can cover up to 60% of the relevant costs. However, as my colleague Inigo will show you in the following, it is important to note that most projects request significantly less than 60% maximum in order to remain cost competitive against other proposals when evaluating on the CO2 avoidance cost criteria. This, as a consequence, means that projects have to present a solid financing plan that combines the subsidy part with equity and debt instruments. It's also worth noting that the Innovation Fund grants are non-repayable, but they are performance-based, not reimbursable like the Horizon Euro. This means that payments are not linked to invoices, but they are linked to milestones and verified results. And this brings us to the lower part of this slide, describing how funds are actually dispersed. The process typically spans over, as mentioned, more than 10 years, and payments are made according to project milestones. Key milestones include, for instance, the grant agreement signature. So once your project is selected, the contract is signed with SENEA. This confirms your funding and sets out the, let's say, agreed timeline and reporting obligations for applicants, which then will trigger the first payment subsequently, which, for instance, can be received shortly after the grant agreement signature to, for instance, cover ongoing DevEx costs. Construction phase, this is the project build phase. In this period, projects start to receive major grant payments, provided that construction progress aligns with the approved plan. Entry into operation, this marks the first commissioning or operational test of your facility. It's a major milestone for the fund, showing that the technology is running under real condition and as planned regarding the agreed timeline. Performance verification then, here the project must demonstrate that it's achieving the expected performance levels, in particular the GHG reductions claimed in the proposal. And verified avoided emissions, the final stage, where the project's long-term climate benefits are validated. And once final results are confirmed, the last tranche of the grant is paid out. So this slide might look a bit like a shopping list, and in a way it is. So it shows the range of sectors that the Innovation Fund can support. And as you can see, it's quite broad. And then rather than reading every item here, let's try to group them in a few main clusters so you can easily identify where your organization and project might fit. The first cluster that we could identify is heavy industry, which would include topics like cement and lime, chemicals, iron and steel, glass, ceramics, and refineries. These are the traditional energy-intensive sectors that produce large emissions, so they're at the core of the fund's decarbonization focus. Second cluster could be named as clean energy production and storage. Here we're talking about renewable hydrogen, wind, solar, geothermal, and energy storage solutions. The fund supports both production facilities and the manufacturing of components like electrolyzer stacks, batteries, and wind turbine parts. This category might be essentially or especially relevant for Denmark, giving the country's strong position in wind, power-to-X, and renewable manufacturing value chains. The third cluster is transport and energy use. Here we find maritime, aviation, and road transport, as well as district heating and cooling, and cross-sector energy integration. The projects in this space often look at alternative fuels, hybrid propulsion, or using renewable heat in industrial processes or ports even. And finally, there's a cross-cutting category, the manufacturing of components for renewable energy or energy-intensive industries. This reflects also the growing focus under the new manufacturing call, which aims to build up Europe's domestic capacity to produce clean net zero technologies. Let's then also have a look at the Innovation Fund portfolio of impacted projects, because I think it gives a really good sense of the program scale and impact. As of now, the fund supports 216 projects, of which 10 have already been completed. And together they present more than 12 billion in EU grants under active grant agreements. This is a massive number. Just to put it into perspective, it's roughly equivalent to the entire annual budget of the European Space Agency, the ESA. The average EU contribution per project is about 56 million euro, but of course there's a wide range, as you can imagine, from small-scale demonstration projects worth a few million to industrial flagships receiving hundreds of millions of euro in support. Now, what's really important is the climate impact. Across the portfolio, the projects are expected to avoid around 837 million tons of CO2 equivalent over their lifetime. That's roughly the same as eliminating all annual emissions from a country the size of Germany for an entire year. So it's not just a symbolic funding, it's making a tangible dent in Europe's emissions. The portfolio currently includes 476 participations, which means an average of just over 2 partners per project. So unlike the Horizon Europe or other collaborative R&D programs, Innovation Fund projects tend to be industry-led, with smaller, more focused consortia and a clear business case behind them. Looking at who's getting funded, a few clear patterns can be identified. Hydrogen, for instance, is leading the way with about 15% of all projects, followed closely by chemicals, cement and lime, and refineries. All classic and hard-to-abate sectors. Then, about a quarter of all funded projects are in the manufacturing and energy storage area, which show how the fund is broadening its focus towards the technologies that enable decarbonization, not just end users, but also equipment produced. And although this is largely an industry-driven program, there's still a significant SME presence. As you see, around 16% of participants together receiving just over 1 billion euro in funding. These smaller companies often bring in specific technology innovations or niche expertise, working alongside larger industrial partners. Let's then also zoom in on Denmark's position within the Innovation Fund, because it's actually a very interesting success story in the European context. Denmark currently has 10 projects and 38 participations across industry, energy, and manufacturing, with an average of almost 4 entities per project. That's a solid presence for a country of Denmark's size, and it reflects both technological strengths, of course, but also the industrial maturity of Danish applicants. The portfolio is well balanced also. We have 5 large-scale projects, 3 manufacturing or net zero technology projects, plus 1 small-scale and 1 pilot project. So Denmark is not only participating in mature large industrial projects, but also investing in early demonstration and manufacturing capacity, showing that the country is active along the entire innovation chain. If we look at the sectoral breakdown on the right, we see some clear national strengths. Of course, wind energy and manufacturing leads this area with around 40% of Danish Innovation Fund's projects. anchored by major industrial players. This really underlines Denmark's role in strengthening the European renewable manufacturing supply chain. Hydrogen and Power-to-X account for 20% approximately, which aligns perfectly with Denmark's national strategy to become a leader in green hydrogen and e-fuels in Europe. Another 20% come from carbon capture and storage, supporting deep industrial decarbonization, especially in sectors like cement and heavy industry. Then the remaining 20% is divided between thermal and energy storage projects, which integrate the renewables into heat networks, and cross-sector integration projects that link manufacturing, energy, and digitalization. And then, from a structural point of view, Denmark's portfolio is dominated by large industrial actors, with proven technology and financial capacity, exactly the type of applicants that align well with the Innovation Fund evaluation standards. However, we do see limited SME role so far. No SME coordinators yet, although many smaller technologies developers are contributing as partners. This is something we expect to evolve as the manufacturing and pilot calls continue to expand. And finally, it's worth noting that funding concentration is strong in areas where Denmark has a world-class expertise, particularly CCUS and clean manufacturing, which will remain central to Europe's decarbonization efforts. This then brings us to the next part of today's session, the Innovation Fund selection criteria. My colleague Inigo will now take you through this section and explain how projects are assessed and what makes an application competitive.
Thank you, Felix, for this clear overview of the Innovation Fund program. I think it gives us a solid shared foundation before we start diving a bit deeper into how projects are actually evaluated. What we'll do next is unpack the Innovation Fund selection criteria, the 5 pillars that determine how your proposals are scored, and we'll share a few practical ways you can self-assess your own projects against them. The goal is to make these criteria less abstract and more actionable, so you can identify where your project stands today and where it might need some reinforcement. As you can see in this slide, it presents a quick map of how proposals are assessed. As mentioned, Innovation Fund evaluates applications against 5 core criteria: degree of innovation, GHG emission avoidance, project maturity, replicability, and cost efficiency, plus up to 4 bonus points for a total of 76. In practice, that means that you must show a clear step change in technology or approach, credible and transparent calculations of both absolute and relative emissions saved, a strong technical, financial, and operational readiness, a realistic plan to replicate the solution across Europe, and a convincing case that public funding is cost-efficient in terms of grants requested per ton of CO2 avoided. It's also important to remember that some criteria have minimum passing thresholds. This means that even if your proposal is excellent overall, failing to reach that minimum will cause the entire application to fail. That's why a balance across all sections is key. Next, we'll take a closer look at each award criterion to understand what evaluators are really looking for, and we will start with the degree of innovation. Innovation Fund prioritizes projects that go beyond incremental improvements, projects that deliver an intermediate or breakthrough step change in technology, business models, and processes. In practice, that means proposals should either combine existing technologies in genuinely new ways, scale up a promising pilot to commercial size, or introduce a completely new approach that can create a market. Small upgrades to today's product or processes usually won't pass the threshold. So when you think about your project, ask yourself, does it merely improve what already exists, or does it fundamentally change how things are done? And to answer this question, let's have a look now at the concrete type of actions Innovation Fund supports. So Innovation Fund recognizes 4 main types of innovation actions. The first one is the first-of-a-kind commercialization type of action. This applies when your technology, process, or business model has only been proven at pilot or a small demonstration scale, and you now want to bring it to full commercial size. This means you are introducing a solution that is not yet commercially available in the EU market. In your proposal, if you select this type of action, you should clearly show why the existing commercial state-of-the-art cannot achieve what you propose and how you will bridge from pilot to full market readiness. Next, we have the second or more of a kind commercialization. Here you build on earlier projects, but you still face significant cost or scale barriers that prevent purely private deployment. This type of actions may be eligible if the relevant costs still constitute a large share of the total project cost and you need public support to achieve viability. So you will need to explain how your project is more than simply copying an existing model, and you'll need to show a cost reduction, a scale effect, or new value chain scenario that makes the project genuinely innovative. Third, we have the smaller demonstrations or pilot plans. In some cases, the right next step is a modest demonstration or pilot rather than a full commercial facility, especially where technology still needs validation in an industrial environment. If you follow this route, you need to emphasize why the size is appropriate, what technology risks are you addressing, and how the step you propose will produce a change in scale. Last, we have scaling up and market rollout type of actions. This route applies when the technology is already proven and you are ready to scale to broad commercial deployment across multiple sites or value chains. In other words, the leap from demonstration to transformation of a market segment. In your narrative, you should show the replicability potential, cost path down, supply chain readiness, and how the project creates the conditions for further rollout. When you prepare your proposal, be explicit about which of these categories your project fits into, and importantly, explain why the scale and timing makes sense. For instance, if your technology is a full commercial size, but you apply under the pilot bucket, you may lose credibility. Also, if your innovation is very similar to one already funded by Innovation Fund, you must explicitly explain what is new in scale, integration, cost, or application, so you go beyond incremental improvement. Now that we have seen how the Innovation Fund classifies innovation, let's move to the second award criteria, the GHG avoidance potential. This criterion has 3 parts, together worth 12 points. And understanding each one will help you present your project impact convincingly. First, we have the absolute GHG emissions avoidance, which is worth up to 2 points. This means the total amount of greenhouse gases your project prevents from being released over its first 10 years of operation. Think of it as the total tons of CO2 saved, a measure of a scale. The more tons avoided, the greater your absolute impact. Second, we have the relative GHG emissions avoidance, which is worth up to 5 points. This compares your project's emissions to a credible reference scenario. For example, a conventional fossil-based plant or the current market standards. It shows how much better your solution performs expressed as a percentage reduction. So if your project emits 85% less than the baseline, that's your relative GHG avoidance. And third, evaluators will assess the credibility of your calculations, which is worth up to 5 points. Evaluators check here how transparent and reliable your methodology is, questioning, are your data sources clear, your assumptions justified, and your calculations verifiable? Weak evidence or hidden assumptions can cost you points here. CINEA, the funding agency, provides a harmonized methodology for these calculations so that all projects are evaluated on the same comparable basis. In upcoming modules of the webinar, we'll dig deeper into the detailed methodology, templates, and common pitfalls to avoid. In the next slide, we provide some examples of GHG avoidance potential. To put the scale of Innovation Fund projects into perspective, let's look at these examples. The slide shows the range of expected GHG emissions avoidance achieved by awarded project grouped by sector and coal type. And these numbers come from the projects that were awarded last year. For instance, energy storage project under the small scale coal expect to achieve between 16,000 and 1.4 million of CO2 equivalent avoided. Under the large scale coal, the range increases significantly from around 2.3 million up to more than 34 million of CO2 avoided. The goal here with this slide is to give you a sense of the magnitude. It helps you benchmark your own project to see whether your expected emissions reductions stand within a competitive range. Now that we have clarified the GHG emissions avoidance and how they are evaluated, let's move to the third award criteria, which is the project maturity. Project maturity is all about one thing, readiness. Under the Innovation Fund, evaluators look at how ready your project is to move from plans to reality. And they assess this from three complementary angles: technical, financial, and operational. Each of these counts 5 points, giving a total of 15. And here is the key insight. This is the section where many proposals lose the most points, often not because the idea isn't strong or good, but because readiness isn't clearly demonstrated. So it's worth spending some extra time here. Over the next slides, we'll unpack each dimension, what evaluators expect, what documentation helps, and how you can self-assess your own level of maturity before applying. Let's start with the first one, which is the technical maturity. Technical maturity is about how far your technology has evolved toward real deployment and whether it can reliably deliver the expected outputs and emissions reductions. In other words, evaluators want proof that your technology doesn't just work in theory, but works in the field. To score well, you need a solid and verifiable evidence of technical feasibility. You can test your project level of technical maturity by walking through a few key questions like the following. Have you completed a formal feasibility study that validates your assumptions and process design? Has your technology reached at least technology readiness level 7, meaning that it has been demonstrated in an operational environment? Do you have technical risk management plan identifying potential issues and mitigation measures? Is your front-end engineering design or detail design finished? And are your suppliers and critical components already secured? If you can confidently answer yes to most of these questions, your project is probably technically mature. If not, now is the time to fill those gaps, because missing evidence can significantly lower your score. Once your technology foundation is strong, the next step is to prove that the financial side is equally ready to support deployment. Financial maturity measures how close your project is to reaching a financial close and securing the necessary investment. Evaluators are looking for proof that the numbers add up and are backed by credible supporting documentation. This means having a robust 10-year financial model that clearly shows your CapEx, OpEx, revenues, and other key performance indicators such as WACC, net present value, or IRR. You'll also need a well-defined financing timeline and a concrete evidence of investors' interest, for example, letters of intent or memoranda of understanding from lenders and equity partners. Here's some questions that might guide you assessing your financial maturity as we did before. Are your CapEx and OpEx estimates backed by actual supplier quotations rather than rough estimates? Do you have offtake or supply contracts already under negotiation or signed to secure revenues? Is your financing plan transparent and balanced, clearly showing where funds come from and how they'll be used? And finally, are financial commitments documented, not just verbal? Again, if you can tick most of these boxes and the other ones shown in the slide, your project is financially mature and credible. Remember, clarity and evidence are your best allies here. Now, even with strong technology and sound financing, success still depends on one thing, the ability to execute. Let's move to the operational maturity subcriteria. Operational maturity looks at how complete, realistic, and credible your project execution plan truly is. Evaluators want to see that you can move from plans on paper to a running facility, safely, on schedule, and within budget. That means having a clear permitting roadmap, achievable construction and operation timelines, a comprehensive risk assessment with mitigation measures in place, and experienced multidisciplinary team ready to deliver. As we did before, let's explore a few practical questions that can help you evaluate how operationally mature your project is. Is your project schedule aligned with permitting and regulatory timelines, or are there hiding bottlenecks? Have you identified all major operational risks, assigned clear owners, and defined practical mitigation actions? Does your governance structure clearly outline roles and responsibilities for decision-making and oversight? And is your core team experienced and resourced enough to execute the project? Again, if you can confidently say yes to these questions, your project is not just ready to build, but ready to deliver. So, and to summarize, project maturity is where ambition meets credibility. It's not just about having a great idea, it's about proving that your team can implement it safely, on budget, and on time. Here, a well-documented evidence-based approach across technical, financial, and operational maturity can make the difference between a winning proposal and one that falls short. Now, with project maturity clarified, let's move to our criteria number 4, which is the replicability potential, and how your innovation can expand its impact across Europe is assessed. Replicability is about multiplying impacts. Is where one successful project becomes many, multiplying both climate and economic impact. Innovation Fund measures how easily your technology, business model, or processes can be transferred elsewhere in the EU and still deliver comparable or even better results. Innovation Fund scores this criteria across 3 angles, each worth 5 points, for a total of 15. First, we have the replicability in terms of efficiency gain and multiple environmental impacts. This rewards projects that make better use of resources and tackle several environmental challenges at once. To score high, you need to show quantified savings in, for example, energy, water, raw materials, and explain how you improve recycling, circularity, or reduce pollution. In our experience, concrete metrics always speak louder than broad claims. Next, replicability in terms of further deployment. In here, evaluators assess whether your solution can expand across sites and sectors. To be competitive, you need to provide solid evidence from market potential to cost trends, showing that scale-up is realistic. And you need to include a clear knowledge sharing plan, including trainings, open data, or manuals that can help replicate your success efficiently. Finally, we have the contribution to Europe's industrial leadership and competitiveness. The sub-criteria focus on how your project strengthens European industry. You need here to highlight new value chains created, intellectual property developed within the EEA, partnership with universities and training initiatives that builds skills and jobs in Europe. Show that your innovation doesn't just work, but it reinforces Europe's long-term technical sovereignty. In short, we need to combine measurable impact, credible scaling path, and clear plan to keep know-how in Europe. Now that we have covered replicability, let's turn to the final our criteria, the cost efficiency. In here, 2 main elements are assessed under this criterion. First, the cost efficiency itself, which is worth up to 12 points and measures how much funding is needed to avoid 1 ton of CO2. And the second sub-criteria is the quality of the calculations, worth 3 points, which looks at how transparent, credible, and well-documented your costs are. The cost efficiency ratio is the Innovation Fund central metric of climate return. It connects 2 things, the total public funding you are requesting and the total greenhouse gas emissions your project will avoid during its operational phase. In other words, it answers a very simple question. For every euro of public support, how much CO2 will actually be avoided? This allows evaluators to compare completely different projects, whether they are in the hydrogen, cement, CCU, or waste sectors, using the same metric, euros per ton of CO2 avoided. The formula for calculating the cost efficiency is straightforward, as you can see in the slide. You take the grant requested in euros and divide it by the total GHG emissions avoidance in tons of CO2 equivalent. The lower this number is, the better your cost efficiency score. Cost efficiency is always relative to your project scale and ambition. If your project achieves very high GHG avoidance, you can justify larger grant and still remain competitive. But if the emissions avoided are smaller, you'll need to limit the grant size to keep your euro per ton ratio within strong range. The European Commission has set reference benchmark that define what a strong cost efficiency look like, and this vary depending on the call. For large, medium, small scale projects, the benchmark is 200 euros per ton of CO2 avoided. For pilot scale projects, the benchmark is much higher, 2,000 euros per ton, recognizing that early stage innovations are riskier and more expensive to scale. Your score out of 12 is based on how your project ratio compares to this threshold. Let's unpack now how this cost efficiency scoring is calculated in the next slide. Yeah. As an applicant, we can easily estimate how many points we are likely to receive out of 12 for the cost efficiency by using the formula shown in the slide. The formula is simple. Cost efficiency points equal 12 minus 12 times the cost efficiency ratio divided by the reference threshold I have just presented. In simple terms, this means that the lower your cost efficiency ratio, the closer you get to 12 points. Based on our experience, we recommend aiming for a score of at least 10.5 or 11 out of 12 in order to remain competitive. Now let's look at two examples to see how all this that I have just presented work together. In example 1, the left side of the slide, the project is applying for the large scale call. This means that a reference threshold of 200 euros per ton of CO2 equivalent will be applied. The project is requesting 75 million euros and is expected to avoid 4 million tons of CO2 equivalent. So the cost efficiency ratio is 75 million divided by 4 million, which equals 18.75 euros per ton of CO2 equivalent. If we apply the above formula, we get 10.88 points. When rounded to the nearest half point, this gives us a final score of 11 points. In example 2, on the right side of the slide, the project is applying for the pilot call, and therefore the reference threshold is lower, higher, 2,000 euros per ton of CO2 equivalent. The project is requesting 20 million euros in grant and will avoid 100,000 tons of CO2. This gives a cost efficiency ratio of 20 million divided by 100,000, which equals 200 euros per ton of CO2 equivalent. And again, using the formula above, we get 10.8 points, which again rounds to 11 points. In summary, and as you can see, even though example 2 has a cost efficiency that is 10 times higher than example 1, it still receives the same score as example 1 because of the different threshold applied. This shows how important it is to carefully choose which call you apply for. So when preparing your application, the goal is clear. Keep your cost efficiency ratio below the relevant benchmark and as low as possible. Now that we have covered the cost efficiency, let's turn to the final element in the evaluation framework, the bonus points. Innovation Fund offers up to 4 bonus points. The first one is the net carbon removals. This bonus rewards projects that remove CO2 from the atmosphere, meaning that your relative GHG emission reduction is higher than 100%. Second, we have other GHG reductions. this bonus is awarded for projects that reduce other GHG emissions, in addition to the ones directly covered by the Innovation Fund methodology. Third, we have the use of additional renewable energy sources, or RFNBOs. If your project uses extra renewable energy or renewable fuels of non-biological origin beyond its normal energy requirements, you can claim this bonus point. And finally, we have the maritime sector projects bonus point, which applies to maritime transport projects that deliver clear, verifiable reductions in GHG emissions for shipping operations. Together, these 4 points award projects that go above and beyond, delivering not just innovation and emissions cut, but measurable, lasting, additional positive environmental impacts. Let's take a step back and look at the full scoring picture. As previously mentioned, the Innovation Fund uses a 76 points scale in total. 72 out of those points come from 5 main evaluation criteria and up to 4 additional points from the bonus. The table you see here gives a detailed breakdown showing not only how much each criterion is worth, but also where minimum threshold applies. And this is a crucial part. If any single criteria with a minimum pass score falls short, for example, if financial maturity scores below 3 out of 5, the entire proposal fails, regardless how strong the rest may be. It's an all or nothing rule designed to ensure overall robustness. You'll also notice that some calls, such as pilot calls, apply slight variations in weightings. For instance, in pilot call, innovation counts double. We'll go into those specific differences and what they mean for the proposal strategy in upcoming webinar modules. For now, keep this table in mind as your roadmap. Every point matters, and a strong balance across all criteria is the surest path to success. Okay, now that we have covered Innovation Fund selection criteria, let's turn to the practical and very relevant question of how much funding your project can actually deliver. This topic has already been introduced by Felix. It is worth spending a few more minutes at this stage. What we'll do in this section is walk through the logic behind calculating the grant size. In other words, how the Innovation Fund determines the share of cost it can cover, and how that figure connects to the project GHG avoidance and cost efficiency. So let's begin by understanding how the Innovation Fund estimates the maximum grant that can be requested. The maximum grant amount is up to 60% of the total relevant cost. But we need to ask here, what are the relevant costs? Relevant costs are the net extra cost directly linked to the innovative technology that reduces greenhouse gas emissions. In simpler terms, relevant costs represent how much more expensive your innovation, low carbon solution is compared to conventional alternatives. There are 2 official methodologies for calculating this relevant cost. The first one is the non-reference plant methodology, which is the default one. Here, you calculate all cost of your innovative project, DevEx, CapEx, OpEx, and maintenance CapEx, all expressed in present value. Then you subtract any revenues or benefits again in present value. What remains is your total relevant cost. So, and this is key, the more profitable your project is, the smaller your relevant cost, and therefore smaller your potential grant. The second methodology is the relevant plant methodology, which applies only when a comparable conventional plant exists, one capable of producing the same output using a standard technology. In that case, you calculate the difference in cost and revenues between the 2 plants over a 10 years period. This isolates only the extra cost that is directly tied to emission reduction and achieved through innovation. And one key clarification, the maximum grant is not 60% of the total project cost. Project cost and project relevant cost are not the same thing. The maximum grant amount is up to 60% of the total relevant cost. In the next slide, we'll look at how these calculations are affected by the cost efficiency criteria. As we mentioned in previous slide, the Innovation Fund can cover up to 60% of the total relevant cost. That gives us an upper limit of what we could, in theory, request. But before locking in that figure, we need to check whether the project remains competitive in terms of cost efficiency. Remember, our criteria number 5, cost efficiency, evaluates how much grant you request per ton of CO2 equivalent avoided. To stay competitive, your project needs to show a smart balance between how much funding you ask and how much CO2 you can avoid. The process is straightforward. First, you calculate your project total GHG avoidance potentials in tons of CO2 you expect to cut. Next, you calculate the maximum possible grant, which is up to 60% of the relevant cost. And then you use those two figures to calculate the cost efficiency ratio. If that number turns out to be too high, meaning your project looks expensive to the emissions it's safe, you'll need to reduce the grant you are requesting to stay below the threshold and remain competitive. I hope this gives you a clear sense of how you align your grant requested with your climate impact. Now, let's take a 2 minutes break before Filippo jumps in and explains the application process and how to prepare a proposal. See you in 2 minutes.
Okay, I think we can finalize this very short break, just not to lose the rhythm of the presentation. And yes, many thanks, Inigo, for clarifying those two key concepts of the relevant cost and the cost efficiency ratio, which represent the baseline for estimating the grant size of an innovation fund project. But now let's have a look to the key steps that need to be taken for preparing a compelling project proposal, as well as the timeline which you may expect in case of being awarded and starting your project execution with the support of the EU Innovation Fund. Our recommended process starts long before the submission deadline. Ideally, you should kick off the proposal preparation around 6 to 7 months ahead of the deadline, in fact. In line with the previous year, the deadline should be expected by the end of April 2026, as you can see in this area of end of April 2026 as a call deadline. So according to this timeline, in the month, 7 months before, around 7 months before, in month 1, you should be defining your main project concept and identifying the main strengths and weaknesses of the project against the Innovation Fund criteria. Should you decide to move forward, this initial project assessment should be concluded with the creation of an action plan and timeline for preparing the proposal, which includes also addressing any gaps you may have spotted in the project scope based on the award criteria that were indicated before by Inigo. This this timeline should happen in parallel with the publication of the official call deadline, which, as Klaus was mentioning, is foreseen by early December this year. From that moment onwards, you will start drafting the main project application, and based on our experience, preparing a solid, comprehensive application may take in between 4 and 6 months. A key aspect is to save also some time ahead of the deadline for making quality check and reviews, and making reviews aiming at ensuring a solid and consistent narrative across the technical and financial parts of the application before the final submission. After the proposal submission, panels of external experts hired by CINEA will review your proposal, and pre-selected projects will be notified around October 2026, after around 6 months from the deadline. This year, actually, the overall process is taking a bit more time. As you learned, the results are expected to be published by CINEA over the next week, early next week. In the following period, so from November until at least January or even March of the following year of 2027, the following period will be devoted to the grant agreement preparation before the official project start. The date of the signature of the grant can vary from project to project and can also depend on the main applicant financial capacity or the number of partners involved in the project execution, among other aspects. So, as we see in this slide, we can summarize, let's say, the key phases of a project application. Let's assume that the main project concept and scope have been already shaped, and you now want to assess its winning chances against the Innovation Fund. So, our recommendation is to perform a complete funding fit assessment to determine whether the Innovation Fund is the right funding vehicle for your project. A useful starting point for the funding fit assessment is the European Commission's self-check questionnaire. This online tool provides a high-level orientation on whether your idea aligns with the Innovation Fund. Completing it at an early stage can highlight whether your project fits the call requirements and whether it's sufficiently mature to proceed. The link on this slide points you to the CINEA webpage where the questionnaire is hosted, and this is a relatively simple exercise that can save you time and effort later on. Also because it immediately spots whether it makes sense to move forward the assessment, or it might be better to look at alternative funding instruments for your specific project. In case the outcome of this self-check questionnaire is positive, we recommend then to perform this more in-depth assessment. And the objective is to evaluate the project suitability and likelihood of success under the Innovation Fund criteria. And the main outcome for this assessment, it is, let's say, in our terminology, we define it funding fit assessment, but the outcome, let's say, for this in-depth analysis can be either a go, in which case you map out a detailed timeline of the project proposal preparation, identifying also key milestones across, the different steps of the project proposal until the deadline, or in case the outcome is a no-go, you may rather opt to find alternative EU or national funding opportunities. We will address also this point later on in the presentation. Once again, the way to assess such funding fit is to benchmark your project against the key award criteria of the EU Innovation Fund call. We have been going through them during Inigo's presentation, but just to briefly remind them, the degree of innovation looks at the first-of-a-kind solution that go beyond incremental innovation and require, of course, also an up-to-date, state-of-the-art analysis of the market, of the available solutions in the European market. Greenhouse gas emissions avoidance assess the absolute and relative greenhouse gas reductions, so calculation must be credible and verifiable. Project maturity addresses both the technical, the operational, and financial readiness of the project. including also this ability to reach the financial close quite quickly over time. Replicability evaluates this, whether the project can be scaled or replicated with a clear market rollout strategy. And then the cost efficiency indicates the grant requested per ton, the amount of grant requested per each ton of CO2 equivalent that the project will be able to avoid from the atmosphere, to avoid to emit. The following slide, this one, provides an overview of the key documents that you need to have in place to assess your project fit based on each award criterion. So, for instance, when it comes to the degree of innovation, it is important to gather due diligence report and publications or patents on your specific technology, including also this direct benchmarking with competing solutions already available in the European market. For the greenhouse gases emissions avoidance, you should perform initial analysis of the emission savings with reasonable assumptions based on your envisaged production volumes over the first 10 years of operation. For the project technical and operational maturity, you should have in place a clear roadmap to bring your technology to TRL9, so to full market readiness, and also detailed timelines for financial close, construction, and operation, including also the obtention of the relevant and applicable permits for such construction. The financial maturity also requires a 10 years financial model covering the CapEx and OpEx, the market prices, the discount rates, as already indicated by Inigo. Replicability, again, needs a commercial rollout plan. We consider both the increased production volumes of your current facility, of your envisaged facility, for instance, by the introduction of new manufacturing lines or modules, and also the potential replication of such plants or equipment across different geographies within the EU and beyond. Finally, the cost efficiency requires, from one side, that your project presents relevant costs, and at the same time that the ratio in between the grant request and the emissions avoidance stays well below the thresholds of the 200 euros per ton of CO2 equivalent avoided, which again is 2,000 per ton, 2,000 euros per ton in case of the pilot projects. But now let's move to the proposal preparation stage, assuming that the outcome of the funding fit assessment of this initial in-depth assessment is positive, and you now jump into the main application preparation. As you see from this slide, the Innovation Fund application consists of a wide map of documents. And among the annexes, the backbone documents are the business plan, covering all the business and financial assumptions of the project, and the feasibility study, covering the innovativeness and technical and operational feasibility of the project. Other key documents which are respectively complementary to the business plan and the feasibility study are the relevant cost calculator and detailed financial model from one side, and the greenhouse gases calculator from the other. All of them need to be provided as Excel files. In addition, annexes such as the Gantt chart, the construction and environmental permits, letters of intent or memorandums of understanding by off-takers, investors and lenders, and of course also the participants' information file highlighting the applicant's industrial profile, its experience and know-how. All of them are much needed to back up the project readiness. Lastly, Part B, which is the main application document, is a kind of summary of the overall project, tackling both the technical and the financial aspects of the project, as well as also, apart to be described directly in the Part B, the planning of the activities and its replication potential. The Part B is capped at 70 pages, and it may seem a lot, but actually when you have to condense all this information, it falls, quite compressed. It seems to be quite compressed, to be honest. And the Part B is also supported by the Part A, which contains administrative information of the applicants, and the Part C, which is a kind of summary of the main project KPIs. This slide shows how the different application documents align with the evaluation criteria, and why is it so important to carefully prepare each of them to an overall consistent narrative and high proposal score. The feasibility study and greenhouse gas calculation underpin the degree of innovation, and of course also the emission avoidance and technical maturity. The financial information file and detailed financial models speak to the financial maturity directly, as well as the business plan, which demonstrate the financial maturity, but also the baseline for the project's replicability, which is further elaborated within the Part B as the main application document. Additional annexes, such as, for instance, the participant information file and the Gantt chart, serve again as a backup evidence and improve the credibility of your proposal in terms of the operational readiness. The same applies for the LOIs from investors and off-takers for the financial readiness. And finally, the values of the KPIs that are to be included in the Part C form need to consistently mirror the project key data in terms of, for instance, the overall production volumes or the associated greenhouse gases avoided, the request grant amount, etc., etc. But now let's focus on the team which is required to build this project proposal. This has to be a team effort, and as minimum, our recommendation is to have in place 3 key roles: a main contact person who manages the overall process and ensures coherence in the project narrative, a technical expert who develops the feasibility study and focuses on the greenhouse gas calculations according to the EU Innovation Fund methodology, and a financial expert in charge of the business plan assumptions, the design of the financial model, and the relevant cost calculations. The main contact person would also be preparing the documentation for properly justifying the project readiness in the permitting process, the environmental compliance, or the stakeholders' engagement. In addition, if you choose to develop the proposal internally, you, with your own resources, be prepared to invest a significant time and have this team fully devoted to the proposal. Based on our experience, drafting the whole application documents package will require in between 1,100 and 1,250 hours of effort. Of course, you may also engage an external consultancy which could handle the bulk of the drafting, while your team will only focus on providing key data and reviewing the content. However, you should still consider an important time investment from your end, as you are the project experts gathering the key inputs. After the submission comes the evaluation phase. This is where independent experts assess your projects against the award criteria. It's a closed process and you won't receive feedback until the evaluation summary reports are issued. There are 2 dates that are especially important. First, the evaluation summary reports are expected to be sent in October 2026 for the upcoming call. And second, projects that are selected are expected to start in between January and March, the project execution. March, of course, 2027. These dates are indicative and may change slightly, but they can give you a sense of the timeline for the submission, from the submission to the project start. The evaluation process has several stages. There is an initial admissibility and eligibility check. It's a kind of screening to confirm that your project meets formal requirements, such as being within the targeted sectors and cost categories, and also providing all the mandatory documents according to the call. If you pass this initial screening, your proposal moves to the technical evaluation, where the 3 independent experts covering the financial, the technical, and the greenhouse gases aspects score your project against the 5 selection criteria of the program. Their scores are then consolidated in consensus meetings, and the top-ranked project then undergoes selection and final decision, where an expert panel validates the results, and the final choice is done based on technical reports and budget availability. Successful proposals are awarded the project grants, while those that have not been awarded despite presenting a huge potential, we have the option to receive project development assistance from the European Investment Bank to further mature their project and potentially reapply in the following year's call. Receiving an award letter is just the beginning of this process. The grant agreement preparation phase begins with a validation step, usually lasting 5 to 15 days, where basically you update your legal entity details and complete a financial capacity assessment. And then afterwards, over the next 3 to up to 5 months, you will fill specific sections in the grant, in the European Commission project management platform, the so-called Sigma. You will be reviewing the application based on the comments, including the evaluation summary report, and upload it again. Also from its end, the Commission will assign a project officer and a financial officer who review your data and provide comments. So after you respond to this comment, you make some iteration, you prepare a consortium agreement in case your project is also implemented, executed by a consortium, and then resubmit. And after this validation, if the process is completed and as expected, the Commission invites you to sign the final grant agreement. As already introduced by Felix at the very beginning, Innovation Fund grants are paid out based on the achievement of milestones, of concrete milestones. So the project is divided into 3 main phases. The phase 1 covers all the activities that are being deployed until the financial close, so basically the DevEx phase, and it can last up to 4 years, but way more often, actually for successful projects, this period lasts in between 1 and up to 2 years. And during this phase, the milestone payment, the grant, the grant amount associated to these first milestones is up to 40% of the total grant of a project. The phase 2 encompasses the construction period until the entry into operation, and the payment of the grant can cover up to 50% of the total grant. Finally, there is the phase 3 that spans the operation period, where at least 10% of the grant is to be paid after achieving operational milestones and annual payments linked to the verified greenhouse gases avoidance. This is applicable only during the project reporting for the first 5 years of operation. But bear in mind that despite this reporting and payments are only spread over these 5 first years, the overall greenhouse gases calculations at the proposal preparation stage need to be based on the first 10 years of operation, and also solidly justify the expected production volumes from year 6 to year 10. In addition, you also must be aware that the grant payments are subject to be claimed by the Commission if less than 75% of the initially planned emissions avoidance is finally achieved. So assumptions need to be realistic. Having covered the application and evaluation process, we can now look at the example of an already funded project, which illustrates how the different project steps we've discussed come together in practice. Our example is the Starfish project, which in October 2024 was awarded by the European Commission with a grant of 225 million euros. Led by Harbour Energy in Norway, the project will provide an open access to CO2 storage solution in the North Sea. For this, we can count with the presence of Kevin Maisel, who's the country lead of Norway at Harbour Energy, and who will talk about his experience with the EU Innovation Fund program. Kevin, could you start by briefly introducing your project and what motivated your organization to apply for the EU Innovation Fund?
Absolutely. Can I check first, because I have some problems here with the audio and the video in the room. Can you hear me well? Otherwise, I have this highly innovative alternative. All right. No, we'll do that like that. Perfect.
We can perfectly hear you. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. My name's Kevin Meisel. Thanks for the intro and thanks for the opportunity to actually present our project here. Maybe I can start with this line. I think the Innovation Fund for most of the project that actually get it is an absolute blessing, of course. Our project received 225 million euros. But I can also tell you, for the person that actually has to deal with both the application and then the follow-up, it's an absolute nightmare. So I think this is kind of my starting line on all of this. As you mentioned, we do have
a large-scale storage project in Havstjerne that we received that grant for, where we are able to take via ships CO2 from various parts in Europe and associated countries to store the CO2. So that's what we are after. I think I actually leave it like this for the intro, and then rather go in more detail
as
in
we
any
progress.
follow-up questions.
Great, perfect. So, if I may, I will just follow up a bit, and then we'll leave also to questions from the public. But how you approach the application process? Let's say from organizing your team internally to preparing also the required materials. What aspect proved most time-consuming or challenging based on your experience?
I think, I mean, we were one of, at least for me and our organization, it was the first off, right? We didn't have any experience with any other Innovation Fund applications or projects, so there was a bit of a learning process in it. I would have actually appreciated a presentation like this, translating in a way let's say, almost own language of the EU kind of bureaucratic system to translate into project language. I think this was a learning. So I'd highly recommend to engage with people that have experience with that process, whether that's a consultancy or whether that's associated projects that went through the same thing, or ideally something in your organization. I think there was a big learning point. I saw somewhere in the comments somebody mentioned whether this is catering for large organizations projects only. No, I don't have any experience on how to run this from smaller organization, but I kind of tend to agree with that view. It is a major undertaking, and it requires significant effort from multiple people over a longer period of time. So I don't want to discourage any small projects to actually apply for this, but just kind of be realistic that this is a major undertaking. Maybe these days with, at least we didn't use the Copilot back in the application. Maybe now it's a bit easier, but it will still be a major undertaking. And maybe also very importantly, a role of a coordinator, right? There's, as we saw, a lot of different documents with sometimes overlapping content, and to stay consistent in your message requires really kind of somebody who overlooks the whole process and actually reads all the documents.
I was about to ask you about these lessons learned. You partially covered this question, but if you want to elaborate a bit more, what would you highlight for future applicants in terms of lessons learned from the past?
Yeah, as you said, right, it goes a bit again into the need to translate and to navigate the complex bureaucracy in these applications, right? Whether it's really just an understanding on how, for example, greenhouse gas emissions are being calculated. We do know of projects that had to reapply because of formalistic errors. For example, in the greenhouse gas calculations, right? So it's really important to kind of emphasize that this is all correct. Maybe also to touch a bit on things that were mentioned in your presentation repeatedly, the credibility. I noted something down. What did you call it actually? Something nice around a judgment call on whether you want to be okay, I cannot find it anymore. Here, ambition meets credibility. That's what it was, right? I really like that phrase. And I think a learning here is also there's quite a few of the award criteria that are excluding itself, right? For example, I mean, you want to be extremely ambitious in your timeline and in your project maturity, in your cost efficiency. But at the same time, they want you to be innovative, right? As if it couldn't be much harder, right? So I think it's an early judgment call on where do you actually want to score high in the point systems. And in our case, we sacrificed flexibility a bit to get more maturity, right? So we basically engaged very early with transport providers, with strategic reservoir partners, these kind of things, to get clarity on tariffs and costs, so that we can really demonstrate credibility of these assessments. But of course, you have to, in a way, sacrifice your flexibility, right? You cannot talk to 10 different storage providers or 10 different shipping companies and expect the same level of maturity. So that would be a learning, I think, that went very well for us.
No, absolutely interesting. I mean, we don't want to disclose too much because we will have a separate webinar, let's say, on the tips and tricks, but actually this balancing between innovation and maturity is key, especially you have to weight it also based on, as we will learn, based on the size of the project, whether it's, for instance, a large-scale project or a pilot project that will, assume a different weight depending on this factor, no? And also, yeah, indeed, I mean, also the selection of suppliers, in a way, also the fact of consulting even too many suppliers potentially may indicate, let's say, a lack of maturity because this selection hasn't been done already from your end. So yeah, it's also another element that we could play with. But
it's all, maybe if I can kind of add on this, also the cost assumptions that you're putting into your project, they have a direct effect on the amount of grant that you will receive, and any uncertainty might affect the payout. And if you end up with higher costs in the end, just because you want to demonstrate a very cost-efficient project, it will have an effect on the amount of the grant payout. So again, a maturity in your cost calculation is very important and very key.
Indeed. But you were disclosing already, you were making some spoiling regarding the implementation phase with the CINEA and so on, like being a bit of a nightmare. But can you elaborate a bit more? I mean, what's been your experience so far in terms of reporting, communication with CINEA, managing the project during the execution in general? What was your experience?
Yeah, I guess it's fair to say that the grant doesn't come for free, right? There is apart from the application process and then the negotiation process, which is also up to half a year, I think. There is then quite a bit of follow-up and intermediate milestones that you'll have to kind of reach, which, by the way, also have to be defined upfront in your application. So you really have to be very clear on what you're going to do when, because the milestones and the achievement of these milestones will be very tightly defined by the EU, and there's limited ability to move away from these after the award. Also, an experience is they are surprisingly into the technical details of the project. So I mean, I guess that depends a bit from case officer to case officer, but our case officer is really, there's no bullshitting, if I may say that, right? It's they know exactly what you wrote in the application, and they're following up, and they will ask. Another learning in this aspect is also because of the inability to move away from what you described in the application to a large degree. It's very important. Either you know exactly what you want and you write that, or you include options in your application already. You know that there is a decision coming up, and this is option 1, 2, 3. And sometimes these option 1 to 3, they score differently in your point system, in your award points. So that's also a complication, right? So you're defining a base case and then you move away from that. And if you want to move away from that, make sure that you have very concretely already mentioned why you may move away from this. Because if it affects your scoring system, they may not be allowed to move away from this, because then it's unfair for the other projects that didn't receive funding in the same round.
Indeed, many thanks for this specification, for this contribution. Then, of course, another potential question will be to which extent you you have benefited from receiving an external support. There is also a question actually that I can extract, which is very specific from one of the participants, which is okay. No, I think it's not any longer here. Yeah,
I can see
parts,
there's a question around the innovative element I can see for the project. There's various, but I think the main thing is we are working with what we call floating storage and injection unit, which is, if you're familiar with oil and gas, it's like an FPSO. So it's a stationary floating storage unit that also has the pumps on board to inject the CO2 that it receives from ships into the store. And this is kind of, I guess, the overall main innovative part, because something like this doesn't exist. And here, maybe also there is a bit of storytelling exercise in this, right? Because first of all, you want to be mature. So, we want to make sure that your technical readiness level is not all over the place, but you want to combine these different mature technical elements in something that in combination is new, which kind of scores under innovative part, right? And this is a nice balance between being mature and being innovative. Yeah, maybe that's
no,
that. And of course, there's various smaller, maybe a valve here, a delivery system there that has an innovative part. It's too much technical detail.
No, but that's a key takeaway. I think the balancing is also something we will be addressing specifically in our module 3 session, because it's a key tip for all project proposals that can have winning chances. But regarding
maybe
sorry,
Felipe, you asked me to comment on your, the help of external, right? I think with a lot of effort, it's actually possible to do this yourself and kind of walk through the process. But there's quite a few things that require experience with projects. So as I mentioned in the beginning, I think an external support there is essential. And if it's only navigating the Sigma platform, which is the most unintuitive platform that I've ever seen in my life, it's literally impossible to do it if you don't know it. It's crazy.
I understand, but more in general, what will be, let's say, the key expertise that you will find necessary, let's say, for navigating through these different stages beyond the Sigma in the preparation stage? Is there anything that you will highlight, for instance, a key knowledge, key competence that you will need to have in place?
I think it's just the combination of someone with the oversight of the full project and understanding, and can basically look for consistency. But then there's also a technical part and a financial part, which requires detailed knowledge, right? So you cannot just assign one person to do this. It needs to be a team effort, because there's quite specific technical and financial knowledge on this. Also, there was, the financial maturity. There was the requirement to bring letters of intent from banks to secure your financing. So that also kind of highlights the maturity that these projects expect from you before you apply. So if you're looking for innovation fund to kind of kickstart your project, that's not how it works, right? You actually have to have spent quite a bit of effort already before you can apply for the project. And then the project also, as you mentioned before, it's a lump sum reimbursement of cost upon reaching various milestones. If you don't reach these milestones, you don't get anything. And that's also a very important point. Yeah.
Oh, many thanks. I think you have been covering most of it. Also, you left great tips and considerations regarding this. So I think that it's been extremely valuable to have you here. So to giving the real perspective from a company that has been applied for the Innovation Fund, that is now currently executing a relevant project, both in terms of the impact and the grant that you have been achieving. So many thanks for your participation, Kevin. And I think we have been also addressing most of the questions that were introduced by the audience. So now we should need to transition towards the next part of the final part of our presentation for today, which is the wrap up and the key takeaways of today's session to summarize the program features and what makes a project a good fit for the Innovation Fund. In fact, we can summarize saying that the Innovation Fund isn't suitable for every idea. To be a good fit, your project must give a strong contribution to the decarbonization of the European economy, with quantified estimates of CO2 equivalent avoidance. It should also be innovative, meaning being transformative and introducing a first-of-a-kind technology within the European market, rather than representing an incremental innovation or something already being commercialized that can be already found in the market. Funding is also awarded based on relevant costs and the impact achieved, and only the gap in between the overall CapEx plus the discounted OpEx and minus the discounted revenues over the first 10 years of operation is considered as the baseline for the relevant cost. In addition, there are no advance payments at the signature of the grant. Again, Kevin was also insisting on this same point. It's based on the achievement of milestones, the completion of such milestones. If you don't complete them, you cannot receive, let's say, the corresponding grant amount. Be also prepared for high competition. Success rates in previous rounds have ranged from 2% in 2021 to 17% in the last year call. Not last year exactly, I mean the year 2024, because the results for this year have to be published still. And your project must also be technically and financially mature, with a technology readiness level of at least 7 and a clear path to financial close. Finally, projects should also be scalable in terms of their size and the production capacity, and also replicable, so to potentially be deployed across other locations within both Europe and beyond. They should also show how they can effectively contribute to the European industrial leadership in specific industries. And of course, after all of this, if your project meets these requirements, then the Innovation Fund may be an excellent funding opportunities for you. But what happens if not? Not every project might be eligible for Innovation Fund, not really a good fit, may be eligible, but not really a good fit with high winning chances. So therefore, let's explore also some other complementary and additional funding instruments at European and national level for Danish applicants that may better match certain project profiles. When it comes to the European level, several programs offer alternative pathways. This slide offers an overview of the most relevant ones for green and clean technologies, indicating its main objectives, targets, CRLs, but also the estimated time required for preparing a proposal and its expected deadlines for 2026. The Clean Hydrogen Partnership and the Horizon Europe Cluster 5 calls focus, for instance, on validating new hydrogen, renewable energy, or energy storage technologies and prototypes at technology readiness levels in between 4 and 8, with preparation timelines of 4 to 6 months, roughly. And the deadlines here, in this case, are both in 2 periods of the year, both in January, February 26, and also in April, May 26. The Breakthrough Energy Catalyst, for instance, combines grants and equity to support first-of-a-kind demonstration projects spanning from TRL 5 to 8. The deadline is running, but bear in mind that the program will be only active until the end of 2027. The auctions for hydrogen and industrial heat that also belong to the EU Innovation Fund target very mature technologies, TRL 7 to 9, and emphasize the cost competitiveness. The preparation typically takes 4 to 6 months, and it's the key award criterion in this case, beyond the credibility, of course, of the project, but the actual criterion is the bid offer. And the expected deadline is around February or maximum March 2026 for this year. Connecting Euro facility also supports infrastructure deployment at TRL 8-9. I mean, fully mature technologies, rather focusing on building relevant infrastructure, critical infrastructure at the European level. And deadlines are now closing, I mean, for upcoming ones in December 2025 this year. And as you can see, each of these instruments has different objectives and maturity requirements. So matching your project to the right program is of course essential, depending on your requirements. Regarding the available opportunities at national Danish level, there are two main programs that can represent a potential alternative or even complementary to some other EU funding tools. First one of them being the EUDP, Energy Technology Development and Demonstration Program, that supports development and demonstration of innovative energy technologies, including, for instance, green electricity, energy storage, sector coupling. The TRL, the envisaged TRL, is a bit let's say more flexible, starting from TRL 4 up until 8, and yeah, the preparation time is a bit shorter based on our experience and estimation. And there are two main deadlines: one in March, April 26, and another one in September same year. Grant Solution Program funds very large collaborative research and innovation projects addressing several societal challenges. Also, in this case, yeah, the TRL spanning is way broader than, for instance, other programs like Innovation Fund. The starting point is even 3, so very early, let's say, projects that need to be, let's say, to be validating their own technology at a very early stage. And there are two main stages for the application process. So stage 1, first stage starting in March 2026, and then the stage 2 with a full complete proposal in August 26. National schemes, these two national schemes can be pursued alone or in combination with other EU instruments, as I was telling before, depending on your project scope and also the envisaged readiness. But now we have basically reached the conclusion of this session. We hope, of course, we have demystified the Innovation Fund application process, highlighted what the evaluators look for, and introduce also alternative funding avenues. But now we invite you to ask any questions, share your project ideas, and discuss how we can support you in your innovation journey. And maybe we can leave also this slide where you can have our full contact details. So please feel free to reach out to us for a free preliminary assessment of the project, or further clarify any doubts you may have on the Innovation Fund program and the application process. As you know, as it was also introduced by Klaus at the very beginning of the presentation, Danish applicants can also benefit from the support of Danish Energy Agency to validate your project idea against the Innovation Fund, with the assistance of accredited business consultancies like us. And last but not least, save also the date for the 2 additional webinars, which we will organize on the 18th of November and the 8th of January, which will respectively focus on analyzing in depth the Innovation Fund award criteria and how to address them in the application, and also key tips for preparing a winning project. But now the floor is yours, so we can read and go through the questions that you are dropping and solve some of them. I don't know if you want to start taking some of them, Felix or Inigo. Let's go. I think some of these have been already addressed.
There is one question asking, saying that the 2024 call states that relevant cost as CapEx minus OpEx plus maintenance CapEx, and they ask, where does the concept of DevEx being included in the relevant cost calculations come from? The CapEx definition that is provided in the relevant cost methodology calculation already includes DevEx. So DevEx is part of the CapEx. In this methodology document, there is a full list of what is included in the CapEx, and DevEx costs are already included there. If we have included the DevEx as a separate item in the formula, is because we wanted to highlight that these costs are also included or are relevant
Eligible.
for
Yeah.
eligible. Yeah. Yeah.
Great.
I see there was also a question on which parts of the team or application can be best outsourced. Definitely, support is, based on our experience, required in the financial Excel and the, let's say, the GHT calculation, because those are based on specific methodology, which might go away from a standard LCA analysis, for instance. And also having a supporting partner in filling the relevant cost calculator based on a financial model, making sure that the alignment is given. And then also regarding the impact quantifications overall, not only doing the GHT calculations, but also elaborating on other GHT potential savings that can give you a bonus point. So aligning quantifications and financial figures throughout the proposal, with in addition a final review towards the end. I think this is kind of mandatory for applicants to have in place. Apart from that, of course, different specific annexes like the feasibility study or the business plan can also be outsourced, or if you choose to choose a consultancy that helps you in being in the driving seat, so to say, having the full control of all the application documents, of course, then you can definitely save a considerable amount of time and ensure that towards the end everything is aligned. And also the question on how much do you feel project public recognition or social media hype helps with getting. I wouldn't call it hype. I mean, in the end, you must know that CINEA has invites external evaluators, experts from industries, financial experts, investors. They will read the proposals, but they will also in parallel be on LinkedIn, see social media publications of the applicants, the proposals they are reviewing from. So it definitely helps in using those channels to promote the project and make everyone updated on project specific aspects, like for instance signing an agreement with a key stakeholder, or getting into a next engineering phase, passing a decision gate, etc. This is definitely not to be underestimated.
There is another question from Lars Henrik Jewel regarding the possibility to obtain support for manufacturing capacity, and if we can elaborate a bit more on the overall principle calculating the greenhouse gases emissions reduction for this type of project. I can take it, just if you want to complement. The key idea here is that as you are manufacturing a component, for instance, let's suppose that you are manufacturing, just to give an example, under the renewable energy sector, blades, let's say, for offshore wind towers. Okay, so you should be taking into account, out of the total production of renewable energy of a wind turbine, the weight of the blade should be calculated as the weight of the cost, let's say, of the blade over the total capex that you need to incur for not only manufacturing but also installing a wind turbine offshore or onshore. Okay, so the corresponding amount should be then consider. No, just assume that you are, for instance, manufacturing these 10 turbines. 10 blades, let's say, for the turbines. So each of these 10 blades should consider an operation period, so the electricity which is being produced over an operation period of 5 years. So, for instance, that means that the operation period will be 5 years, and you will take into account the total amount of blades that you are producing over the first 10 years of operation. So let's assume that you produce, for instance, 10 blades every year. So all in all, it will be 100 blades. And each of those 100 blades should be accounting for a 5 years operation period. I think we cannot elaborate much more than that, but of course, if you want to, receive some other insights, you can feel free to reach out to us. Any other question that we may have missed? Of course, you can access the presentation afterwards. I think there is a list of participants, right? So you can, the presentation will be available. I don't know exactly the details, but I guess each of you can access this presentation afterwards. Any question that we may also think of for solving any doubt maybe regarding this? There was an important reflection that was brought by Kevin, who I would like to thank again because it was extremely insightful to have him in the webinar. So I don't know if you, Kevin, would like to further elaborate on something else. Just maybe one last tip for applicants that are now deciding whether to apply or not for the Innovation Fund. One piece of recommendation, the most important one, maybe.
I was about to thank you for the opportunity to do a bit of a sales pitch for our project, but then the second part of your question came. So I think I kind of mentioned most of the aspects that we found important, and just kind of to re-emphasize that it's quite an undertaking, but of course, nothing's for free. So, and these can be quite significant contribution to the projects. I'm also very happy, and then I'm using the opportunity for a short sales pitch, right? Happy to discuss with anybody who's interested in a kind of mature project that is able to calculate the cost for that part of the value chain quite precisely. But also in general, if you have a question to the Innovation Fund in general, feel free to just reach out, whether that's in relation to our project or just yours. I'm happy to engage with everybody.
Perfect. Many thanks. And yes, just to remind you that, of course, we could not cover all of the topics that the Innovation Fund is a real word in a way. It's a really comprehensive program. But for that reason, we have structured these webinars into 3 different modules. So in the following one, we will have the chance to address even more in detail the award criteria and how we can address them towards the application preparation process. Kevin was highlighting quite in a very insightful way how you have to balance also, and sometimes evaluation criteria may seem to exclude each other. So that's really important, especially depending on what type of project are you deploying, whether it's a pilot project, a more innovative one, or it's something that is supposed to be more consolidated and validated than just addressing, for instance, the scale of the project itself. So we will address indeed this one. And again, the third module, which is rather focusing on the main tips that we may use, let's say, for preparing a successful proposal during this time frame, starting more or less from now, especially from the publication of the code. But yeah, the code will be very similar. So there are not radical changes. You can start the application as soon as possible. And in fact, as you saw, the earlier, actually, the better. And yeah, from now until April 2026, yeah, we hope we will be supporting you with these insights for preparing a successful proposal. Any final remark, Felix, Inigo?
No, I think all is set, and we are prepared for the next upcoming webinars, as introduced by you, Filippo. There is a question, let's say the last comment that was added. Good to remind where we can sign up for the next modules.
Indeed.
Hannibal, if I may pull you into the arena.
We will be sending that to everybody after this webinar, together with the recording. So there will be a sign-up link for that.
Thanks a lot.
Perfect.
Yes. On that note, then, I think we can conclude today's first session. Thank you very much again for all of your participation, insightful comments. Yeah, thank you very much. And then yeah, let's see us in what is it? 3 weeks time, a bit less, for the next webinar. And yeah, then we go through in more detail the different selection criteria introduced by Filippo. Yeah, looking very much forward to seeing you again in November.
Thank you
Have a
all.
great day. Thank you.
Thank
Likewise.
you all. Bye.
Thank you all. Bye bye.